Ohio, 2012. A quiet suburb nestled in Midwestern calm was shattered by the disappearance of Melissa Carter, a 29-year-old elementary school teacher beloved by her students. What began as a missing person case would soon spiral into one of Ohio's most haunting cold cases. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened to Melissa will leave you questioning everything. And later, the truth behind her killer will stun an entire community. In 2012, Brookfield, Ohio, was the kind of place where nothing terrible ever seemed to happen. A town surrounded by wide cornfields and old maples, where families waved from porches and teachers were local celebrities. Melissa Carter fit right into that picture, the image of warmth, kindness, and stability. At 29, she had already become a beloved figure at Brookfield Elementary, known not just as a teacher, but as a mentor who gave far more than her job required. Each morning, Melissa arrived early to unlock her classroom, turning on soft music while she prepared lessons for her second graders. Her desk was covered in construction paper crafts and thank you cards from students. She spent evenings planning creative reading projects and buying extra supplies out of her own paycheck. For her, teaching wasn't a job, it was her calling. Parents adored her. Colleagues admired her. And in a community like Brookfield, where news traveled fast, Melissa's reputation as the heart of the school spread far beyond the classroom walls. Outside of work, she lived a quiet life in a modest apartment near Elmwood Park, a few blocks from the town's small main street. Every morning before sunrise, she jogged the same loop through the park, waving to the older couple who walked their dog and nodding to the maintenance man sweeping the paths. Neighbors remembered her as friendly but reserved, the kind of person who smiled at everyone but rarely spoke about herself. Her closest friends were fellow teachers, a small circle who gathered every Friday night at a local diner. They'd sip coffee, talk about lesson plans, and sometimes dream about summer vacations they never quite managed to take. Melissa's parents, David and Karen Carter, lived 2 hours away in Columbus but spoke with her almost daily. They were proud. Their daughter, the first in the family to graduate from college, now shaping young lives. Her weekends were simple: church on Sundays, volunteer work at a local literacy program, and long phone calls with her mother. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't the type to seek attention. She preferred predictability, routines, order, and the quiet satisfaction of helping others. But there were subtle details that, looking back, would haunt those who loved her. In the weeks before her disappearance, she had mentioned feeling watched during her morning runs. Once, she told a friend that a car seemed to follow her from the school parking lot, but brushed it off, laughing it away. Brookfield wasn't the kind of place where people feared for their safety. "It's just my imagination," she'd said. In 2012, Brookfield was on the edge of change. New developments were rising. A bigger highway nearby brought more traffic, and with it, a slow shift in the town's peaceful rhythm. To most residents, these were signs of growth. To others, they were signs of the unknown creeping in. For Melissa, life went on as usual. Her days were filled with laughter, her evenings with lesson plans and phone calls, and her nights with the soft hum of the radio as she drifted off to sleep. When she walked into school that last week before her disappearance, no one could have guessed it would be the last time they'd see her smile, the last time she'd lead her class through morning reading, the last time her voice would echo through the hallways of Brookfield Elementary. Melissa Carter's story began as one of light, a young woman devoted to her students, loved by her community, and cherished by her family. But behind the warmth and predictability of her daily life, something unseen was already moving closer. Because even in the most peaceful towns, darkness doesn't announce itself. It waits. It watches. And one quiet autumn night in Ohio, it would strike. Who could possibly want to harm someone as kind and unassuming as Melissa Carter? It was a cool October evening in 2012, one of those nights when the Ohio air carried the faint scent of rain and the streets glowed under amber streetlights. For most, it was just another Tuesday. But for Melissa Carter's friends and family, it would become the night everything changed. Melissa was supposed to be at choir practice at the First Baptist Church by 6 o'clock. She had never missed a session before. Her friends waited, glancing toward the entrance between hymns, expecting to see her familiar smile walk through the door. But as the rehearsal ended and her seat remained empty, unease began to spread. By 8, calls to her phone went unanswered. By 9, that unease turned into panic. A friend drove to her apartment complex on Willow Drive. Melissa's small silver sedan was there, parked neatly as always. But the keys were still in the ignition. Her purse sat on the passenger seat. And inside her apartment, the lights were on, but the place was silent. Her phone was found on the counter, plugged in and untouched. It looked as though she had stepped out for just a moment and never returned. Police arrived shortly after 10 p.m., and what began as a missing persons report quickly escalated into something far more serious. Officers canvassed the area, knocking on doors, searching nearby alleys and wooded paths. Several residents reported hearing faint shouting or a woman's voice near the parking lot around 8:30 p.m., but no one had seen anything clearly. The dim lighting and quiet streets left investigators with few leads. By midnight, news of Melissa's disappearance spread across Brookfield. Her parents, David and Karen Carter, received the call and immediately drove the 2 hours from Columbus, arriving before dawn. They met detectives outside Melissa's apartment, their faces pale, their voices trembling as they described their daughter's routine, how careful she was, how she never stayed out late, how this made no sense. The following morning, the town mobilized. Volunteers gathered at the community center, printing flyers, organizing search parties, and combing through nearby parks and wooded trails. Teachers from Brookfield Elementary joined the search, still in their school sweatshirts, refusing to rest until they found her. By the second day, media trucks lined the street. The once peaceful town now pulsed with fear. Local news anchors called it the Brookfield mystery. Rumors spread through social media, whispers about an ex-boyfriend, a stranger's car seen in the area, even speculation about a random abduction. But police had no evidence pointing in any direction. Detectives reviewed surveillance footage from nearby stores, examined cell phone pings, and set up roadblocks to question drivers, but every lead evaporated. The only thing they knew for sure was that Melissa was gone, vanished without a trace from one of the safest corners of Ohio. Her parents spoke at a candlelight vigil held outside her school just 2 days after she went missing. Her mother's words, cracked and tearful, echoed across the crowd. "Someone knows where she is. Please, please help us bring our daughter home." For a moment, the town seemed united in hope, a community that refused to believe tragedy could happen here. But behind the search efforts and the sympathy, a grim sense of dread began to creep in. 48 hours after Melissa disappeared, a hiker walking near a wooded trail off State Route 7 would stumble upon something that would change everything and turn a missing person case into one of Ohio's most haunting cold cases. And then, 48 hours later, a hiker would stumble upon something that would change the case forever. It was just after 9 a.m. when a local hiker named Dennis Howard called 911 from a wooded area off State Route 7, about 6 miles from Brookfield. His voice was trembling as he reported what he'd found: the partial remains of a young woman, hidden beneath a shallow blanket of fallen leaves. When officers arrived, they immediately recognized what the caller could not bring himself to say. The missing teacher, Melissa Carter, had been found. Her clothing matched the description circulated through the media: jeans, a burgundy sweater, and running shoes. Nearby, police recovered fragments of her broken necklace and what appeared to be drag marks in the dirt. The wooded area was sealed off within minutes. Crime scene investigators moved methodically, photographing every inch of disturbed ground. The discovery site was remote, accessible only through a narrow dirt trail, suggesting whoever left her there knew the area well. It wasn't random. It was chosen. The autopsy later confirmed the horror everyone feared. Melissa had been struck on the head with a blunt object. There were signs she had been restrained, though there was no evidence of sexual assault. The medical examiner estimated the time of death to be within hours of her disappearance. But most haunting was the detail that she had not died instantly, suggesting she may have been alive for some time after the attack. Detectives now faced their most difficult challenge: finding out who had taken her and why. Yet the crime scene gave them little to work with. There were no fingerprints, no clear tire tracks, and no conclusive weapon. The only promising evidence came from trace materials collected near her body, several short fibers, and a small fragment of adhesive tape. It wasn't much, but it was something. As word of her death spread, Brookfield descended into mourning. The same schoolchildren who had drawn missing posters now placed flowers beneath the flagpole outside the school. Teachers gathered in silence. A memorial formed outside her apartment. Candles, letters, photos of smiling faces now lit by the flicker of grief. The once quiet Ohio town was shaken to its core. People who used to leave doors unlocked now double-bolted them. Parents walked their children to the bus stop. Neighbors avoided late-night strolls. A sense of innocence had vanished with Melissa. Detectives interviewed dozens of witnesses, but the answers were thin. A nearby security camera caught the faint image of a vehicle leaving the area around the estimated time of her abduction, a dark-colored sedan with no visible plates. But the footage was too grainy to identify. Investigators began building timelines, comparing cell phone data, and analyzing Melissa's last communications. She hadn't sent a single text or call after leaving home that evening. Whoever intercepted her had acted quickly and efficiently, as if they'd planned it. The case was now officially classified as a homicide. The media covered every update. Her parents appeared on television, begging for information. But leads slowed. The fibers were sent for analysis, though in 2012, forensic technology was limited. The results came back inconclusive. For detectives, frustration grew. They had a victim, a rough timeline, and a devastated town, but no suspect. Still, hidden in those tiny fibers near Melissa's body was the key that would one day unlock everything. But in 2012, no one could have imagined it. What could the few strands of fiber near her body reveal about the person who took her life? It was early Sunday morning, October 14, 2012, 48 hours since Melissa Carter vanished without a trace. The sun had barely crested over the tree line when a local hiker, Evan McMillan, set out on a familiar trail off State Route 7, a wooded area just outside Brookfield, Ohio. What he expected to be a quiet morning in nature would soon become the discovery that shattered a community. Roughly a mile into the trail, Evan noticed something unusual, a flash of color beneath the scattered autumn leaves. At first, he thought it was discarded clothing. But as he approached, the truth came into focus. A hand. Still. Pale. Lifeless. Within seconds, he was dialing 911, his voice trembling as he told dispatchers what no one in Brookfield wanted to believe. "I think I found her." When officers arrived, the area was immediately sealed off. The small clearing became the epicenter of what would soon be declared a homicide investigation. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered against the wind as detectives moved carefully, marking evidence, photographing every inch. There she was, Melissa Carter, partially concealed under leaves and branches, as though someone had tried to hide her, but not well enough. Her clothing was disheveled, her jewelry still on. There were no visible defensive wounds, no immediate sign of a struggle. But the most telling detail came from the way she was found, her hands bound loosely, suggesting she had been restrained. A deep bruise on the back of her head pointed to a single, fatal blow. The medical examiner would later confirm blunt force trauma. Detectives searched the area meticulously. They found partial shoe impressions in the soft soil, perhaps from a boot or worn sneaker. Nearby, a few thin strands of synthetic fiber clung to the bark of a tree, barely visible, yet possibly crucial. There were no tire marks leading in or out. Whoever had done this had come on foot or had parked farther away, hidden from sight. For investigators, it was both something and nothing. The scene gave them fragments, no weapon, no fingerprints, and no witnesses. But those fibers became their only tangible lead. News spread quickly through Brookfield. Word that Melissa had been found, and found dead, struck like a thunderclap. Vigils were organized almost immediately. Students from her elementary school placed candles and handwritten notes outside her classroom window. Parents hugged their children tighter that night. The sense of safety that once defined their small Ohio town now fractured. Detectives from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation joined local officers to expand the search radius. They interviewed hikers, joggers, and residents living near the trail. Nothing. No one had seen anything suspicious that night. Surveillance cameras in the area offered little. The nearest one was 2 miles away, facing a gas station parking lot. The medical examiner's report brought only more questions. Melissa's time of death was estimated between 8:30 and 9 p.m. Around the same time, neighbors reported faint shouting near her apartment complex. But if she was taken from there, how had no one seen it happen? How did her body end up miles away? Every clue seemed to circle back into silence. Yet in the quiet hum of the crime lab, something small was stirring. Those few strands of fiber recovered from the tree were being analyzed under a microscope, their color, texture, and composition unlike anything naturally found in the woods. Could this overlooked fragment hold the identity of Melissa's killer? The town mourned, the police searched, and the world seemed to move on. But deep inside the lab, investigators were about to uncover something that would lead the case down a path no one saw coming. What could the few strands of fiber near her body reveal about the person who took her life? In the days following the discovery of Melissa Carter's body, investigators faced what every detective dreads, a crime scene that whispered but refused to speak. Leads were thin, evidence was scattered, and nothing fit neatly together. Detectives began where all investigations do, with the people closest to the victim. Melissa's colleagues at Brookfield Elementary described her as kind, meticulous, and deeply devoted to her students. She rarely went out late, preferred evenings with lesson plans and music rehearsals, and had no known enemies. Yet, as detectives quickly learned, even the most ordinary lives can hide shadows no one expects. Parents of her students recalled seeing an unfamiliar man loitering near the school parking lot on multiple occasions, tall, hooded, and watching from a distance. Some brushed it off as coincidence. Others felt a chill even then. The description was too vague for a sketch, too broad for a lead. Still, detectives logged it, hoping it might resurface later. Inside Melissa's apartment, forensic teams cataloged every item. On her bedroom dresser, a broken necklace, the clasp snapped, likely during a struggle. Near her car, faint tire impressions that didn't match her own vehicle. And those same strange fibers from the wooded crime scene appeared again, this time on the driver's seat of her car. It was the first sign of possible transfer evidence, but without a DNA match, it was meaningless. As local resources stretched thin, the FBI's Violent Crimes Unit stepped in, forming a joint task force with Ohio authorities. Agents analyzed Melissa's phone records, tracing her last known messages, a few texts with colleagues, one unanswered call to a friend around 7:42 p.m., and then silence. No signs of distress. No coded messages. Nothing unusual. Surveillance footage from nearby intersections revealed little. Melissa's car returned home that evening as expected, but there were no visible pursuers, no suspicious vehicles trailing behind. A grainy clip from a gas station camera caught what might have been a dark sedan heading toward her complex around 8:20 p.m., but the plate number was unreadable. Investigators began piecing together a timeline. 7:30 p.m., Melissa leaves school. 8 p.m., she arrives home. By 8:30, neighbors hear shouting. By 9 o'clock, her phone goes dark. Somewhere in that 30-minute window, everything changed. The press soon descended on Brookfield, crowding outside the police station, demanding updates. News anchors labeled it the teacher's trail. The case captured public attention, not just for its mystery, but because it struck at the heart of safety. If someone like Melissa could vanish from her own apartment complex, no one felt secure. Detectives chased every possible angle. Former classmates, old boyfriends, co-workers, everyone was questioned. A few leads looked promising at first. A delivery driver with no alibi, a neighbor who owned a car similar to the one caught on camera. Each lead ended the same way: innocent explanations, dead ends, and frustration. Months passed. The evidence board filled with photographs, maps, and red string connecting theories that led nowhere. The tire tracks didn't match any vehicles registered nearby. The necklace yielded no fingerprints. And those mysterious fibers, a synthetic blend unfamiliar to local manufacturers, refused to tie back to anyone in Melissa's life. By spring 2013, the investigation had stalled. The task force scaled down. The vigils became smaller. Reporters stopped calling. Melissa's parents left her apartment untouched, her clothes folded neatly, her calendar still open till October 2012, as if she might walk through the door at any moment. But behind the scenes, one detective refused to close the file. Something about those fibers gnawed at him, their texture, their source. He sent them off for additional analysis, knowing technology was evolving fast. Maybe, just maybe, science would one day catch up with the truth. With no suspects and no clear motive, how long could the investigation stay alive before the trail went cold? By the summer of 2013, the investigation into the murder of Melissa Carter had all but stalled. What began as a full-force, multi-agency effort had now faded into a quiet, uneasy lull. The once bustling command center inside the Brookfield Police Department stood mostly empty. The evidence board, once alive with theories, photos, and colored string, now hung static, gathering dust beneath the hum of fluorescent lights. Detectives had exhausted every lead. Hundreds of interviews, endless lab results, dozens of search warrants, and yet, no suspect, no motive, no closure. The tire tracks, the broken necklace, the mysterious fibers, none had brought them closer to the truth. Each clue had led investigators down a new path, but every one of those paths ended the same way, in silence. As the months rolled on, public attention drifted. The media, which had once camped outside the police station for nightly updates, moved on to newer headlines. The story of the beloved Ohio teacher was replaced by other tragedies, other victims. But for Melissa's family, the silence was unbearable. Her parents appeared on local television every anniversary, pleading for information, their voices trembling with both hope and exhaustion. Detective Robert Kane, the original lead on the case, refused to give up easily. Even as pressure mounted to close the file, he pushed for new forensic testing, but budgets were tight and priorities shifted elsewhere. "We'll keep it open," his supervisor had said, "but without fresh leads, there's nothing more we can do." A few months later, Kane retired, worn out, frustrated, and haunted by the case he couldn't solve. When the boxes were handed off to a younger detective, the evidence inside looked almost ghostly. Photos of Melissa smiling in her classroom, plastic bags sealed with fibers and dirt, and stacks of reports written in fading ink. For the new team, the case felt less like an active investigation and more like a burden of the past, a mystery destined to remain unsolved. Meanwhile, Melissa's loved ones found their own ways to keep her memory alive. Her former students, now teenagers, organized memorial walks and painted murals at the school. Her parents created a scholarship in her name, a way for her passion for education to live on. Each October, the community gathered for a candlelight vigil in the park where she once jogged. Her mother would always stand at the front, holding a framed photo, repeating the same quiet plea to the cameras. "Someone out there knows what happened. Please, just come forward." Years turned into milestones. 5 years since the murder. 6, 7. The world around Brookfield changed. New businesses, new families, but the shadow of that unsolved crime never truly faded. For every celebration, every town event, there was an unspoken understanding. Justice for Melissa still hadn't come. In the police archives, her file remained, marked cold case, active, unsolved. Detectives came and went, sometimes reopening it briefly, rereading the notes, re-examining the crime scene photos, only to set it aside again. There was no new evidence, no confessions, no miracles. But in 2021, something began to stir quietly behind the scenes. Across Ohio, law enforcement agencies were beginning to revisit old cases with a new kind of tool, one that could see what older technology could not. DNA analysis, once limited and costly, had evolved into a powerful weapon for truth. And in one unassuming box of evidence labeled Fibers 2012 lay the very clue that would soon pull this case back into the light. Nearly a decade later, technology was finally ready to expose the truth hidden in those fibers and reveal the name behind Melissa Carter's murder. Nearly a decade after Melissa Carter's murder, hope had become a fragile concept for both her family and investigators. But in early 2021, the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation launched a new statewide initiative aimed at breathing life into long-forgotten files. It was called Project Resolve, a cold case program that combined forensic genealogy, next-generation DNA sequencing, and modern data analytics. For detectives across the state, it represented something powerful, a second chance. Melissa's case was among the first chosen. Inside a sealed evidence bag, those tiny fibers once found on her clothing were sent to the BCI laboratory in London, Ohio. For years, those strands had yielded nothing. But new technology, capable of analyzing DNA fragments so degraded they were once deemed useless, now promised a fresh look. Weeks passed. Technicians worked methodically, using next-generation sequencing to separate trace material from contaminants. Finally, under the fluorescent light of the lab, a partial DNA profile emerged, male but incomplete. Still, it was enough to upload into national databases. When the results came back, investigators held their breath. No direct hit. The profile didn't match anyone in Cody's or state records. But that wasn't the end. Instead, the team turned to forensic genealogy, the same cutting-edge process that had solved dozens of cold cases nationwide. Analysts uploaded the partial DNA into public genealogy sites, searching for potential relatives. Slowly, connections began to form, distant cousins, third and fourth-degree matches, all tracing back to one extended family with deep roots in northeastern Ohio. Investigators built a family tree, carefully cross-referencing ages, locations, and known employment histories. One name stood out, a 42-year-old maintenance worker named Daniel Reese. He lived less than 20 miles from Brookfield and, years earlier, had worked part-time at the local elementary school, the same one where Melissa taught. The detail hit detectives hard. Reese's name had never appeared in the original investigation. He'd moved to a nearby town shortly after 2012, avoiding scrutiny. According to records, he had no criminal history beyond minor infractions, nothing that would have placed him in any database. But his proximity to the victim, his past employment, and his fit within the genetic profile all painted a compelling picture. Quietly, investigators reopened the case under strict confidentiality. They began tailing Reese, watching his movements, collecting items he discarded, coffee cups, cigarette butts, tissues. Every piece of trash held potential evidence. After several weeks, a discarded water bottle provided the breakthrough they'd been waiting for. Lab results confirmed it. A full DNA match to the sample recovered from Melissa Carter's clothing. The odds of error were virtually non-existent. The man who'd slipped through every investigative crack for nearly 10 years had finally been identified. When detectives arrived at his modest home, he appeared calm, even polite. Reese answered the door wearing a mechanic's uniform, unaware that his past was seconds from catching up to him. Investigators explained they wanted to ask him a few questions about a case from 2012. He hesitated, eyes flickering in confusion, or perhaps recognition. At the station, the tone shifted. As DNA evidence was presented, Reese's composure began to crumble. He denied knowing Melissa, then admitted he might have seen her at the school, but insisted he had nothing to do with whatever happened. Detectives pressed harder, pointing to the fibers, the match, the timeline. But one question remained, one that had haunted investigators for years. If Reese truly was the man responsible, what had driven him to take Melissa's life? When detectives confronted him with the full weight of the DNA evidence, would Daniel Reese finally confess or deny everything once more? It happened quietly, just after sunrise on a cold morning in February 2022. A convoy of unmarked vehicles rolled into a quiet suburban neighborhood in Warren, Ohio. The air was still, the streets lined with frost. Neighbors later said they thought it was a drug bust or a domestic call, until they saw uniformed officers approaching a small white bungalow at the end of the cul-de-sac. Within minutes, police had surrounded the home, weapons drawn, voices firm but controlled. Inside, 42-year-old David Larkin was still in his pajamas when a knock came. "Police! Open up!" echoed through the thin walls. Moments later, he was in handcuffs, led down the driveway, as stunned neighbors stood frozen behind curtains. Cameras arrived not long after, capturing the moment that would replay on Ohio news stations for days. the quiet arrest that ended a decade of unanswered questions. Larkin was no stranger to the community. He worked maintenance jobs around town, fixing plumbing, patching roofs, doing repairs at local schools, including the one where Melissa Carter once taught. He was polite, unassuming, the kind of man no one looked twice at. He attended summer barbecues, helped elderly neighbors shovel snow, and even volunteered at local fairs. To everyone around him, he was just Dave. But behind that ordinary exterior, investigators now said, lay the answer to one of Ohio's most haunting cold cases. The Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation confirmed that Larkin's DNA was a definitive match to the partial male profile extracted from Melissa's clothing using advanced sequencing. It was science, pure, indisputable, that linked him directly to the 2012 crime scene. For detectives who had worked the case from day one, the arrest was both vindicating and emotional. Some had retired and returned just to see it happen. They remembered the endless interviews, the sleepless nights, and the frustration of watching leads collapse. Now, after nearly a decade, they could finally call Melissa's family with the words they had waited years to say, "We got him." At the press conference later that afternoon, the atmosphere was tense but electric. Reporters filled the room, their microphones crowding the podium as the sheriff stepped up. Behind him stood Melissa's parents and her younger sister, their eyes wet with emotion. This arrest, the sheriff announced, was made possible by advances in DNA technology and the tireless dedication of our cold case unit. The crowd erupted in applause, but beneath the relief, questions lingered. How could David Larkin, a man who had been interviewed in 2012, slip through the cracks? It turned out that detectives had spoken with him briefly after discovering he had worked maintenance at Melissa's school. But without physical evidence back then, the conversation had gone nowhere. He'd been polite, cooperative, and forgettable. Once dismissed, he quietly faded back into everyday life while the case went cold. Neighbors were stunned. "He fixed my fence last summer," one woman told a local reporter. "He was always so kind. I can't believe it." For the community, the arrest felt like a betrayal, proof that even the most ordinary faces could hide darkness. Melissa's family found a bittersweet peace in the news. Her mother said softly, "We never stopped believing. Melissa deserves justice." But her father's voice trembled when he added, "Now we just need to know why." As the trial date drew closer, whispers spread of possible new evidence, hidden details, and inconsistencies in Larkin's original statements. What if there was more to the story, more than anyone imagined? The case that had finally found its suspect was far from over. The question now was chillingly simple. Would the system deliver justice or expose even deeper secrets buried beneath Ohio's most infamous cold case? By the time the trial of David Larkin began in late 2023, the case had already become one of the most talked-about cold case investigations in Ohio's history. Nearly 11 years had passed since Melissa Carter's murder, and every courtroom seat was filled. Reporters lined the hallways of the Trumbull County Courthouse, cameras rolling as the man once dismissed as just another maintenance worker now stood accused of first-degree murder. The prosecution opened with precision. They reconstructed the entire timeline, from Melissa's final moments in 2012 to the modern DNA breakthrough that reignited the investigation. Jurors watched as the prosecutor displayed side-by-side images of fiber evidence, lab reports, and surveillance footage showing Larkin's old pickup truck near Melissa's neighborhood on the night she disappeared. The narrative was chillingly complete. Science had done what memory and rumor could not. Expert from the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation took the stand next, describing how next-generation sequencing had unlocked previously degraded samples. The odds of this DNA belonging to anyone else, one analyst testified, are 1 in 1.7 trillion. The courtroom fell silent. Even Larkin's attorney didn't challenge the statistic. He simply wrote something down and avoided eye contact with his client. But the defense fought back hard. They argued contamination, suggesting that because Larkin had worked as a janitor at Melissa's school, his DNA could have transferred innocently. They pointed to years of evidence storage, claiming the chain of custody had gaps. They also highlighted that no eyewitness had ever placed Larkin at the scene of the crime. Suspicion, the defense lawyers said, pacing before the jury, is not the same as proof. Still, the prosecution countered with detail after detail, the inconsistencies in Larkin's alibi, the phone records that contradicted his story, and the chilling fact that he had abruptly quit his maintenance job just weeks after Melissa's death. Former coworkers recalled odd behavior, long absences, late-night drives, and unexplained injuries on his hands. Each new revelation painted a picture of a man who had hidden in plain sight for a decade. Melissa's friends and family also took the stand, their voices trembling as they shared memories of her final days. They spoke of her dedication to her students, her excitement about a new teaching program, and her fear that someone had been watching her in the weeks before she disappeared. Their testimony brought emotion back into a courtroom that had been buried under forensic data. When closing arguments began, the tone shifted. The prosecutor's voice carried through the silent room. For 11 years, Melissa Carter's story was buried in a box labeled unsolved. Today, we open that box, and we give her voice back. It was both an appeal and a demand, justice long overdue. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the tension was unbearable. Reporters typed furiously as the foreman stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, David Larkin, guilty of murder in the first degree." Gasps and sobs echoed through the courtroom. Melissa's mother clutched her husband's arm, tears streaming freely. One detective in the gallery lowered his head, whispering, "We did it." Larkin showed no visible reaction as he was led away in handcuffs, sentenced to life without parole. Outside, a light snow began to fall, the same kind of quiet that had once cloaked the morning she vanished. Justice had finally come to Ohio. But even as relief washed over the Carter family, one question still lingered in the air. What lessons would this small town, and the nation watching, truly take from Melissa's story? Melissa Carter's life may have been tragically cut short, but her presence continues to resonate throughout Brookfield, Ohio, and beyond. The school where she once taught has become a living tribute to her dedication, filled with reminders of her kindness and passion. Her old classroom, now adorned with photos and mementos, serves as a quiet testament to the impact she had on students' lives. Each year, a scholarship bearing her name is awarded to an aspiring educator, a small but enduring way of extending her influence, inspiring others to follow in her footsteps. Teachers who worked alongside Melissa described the scholarship not just as a fund, but as a symbol of perseverance, a statement that her life and work continue to matter. The broader community, too, has embraced her memory in tangible ways. Candlelight vigils, annual literacy drives, and volunteer events are held in her honor, providing a dual purpose: remembrance and service. Local organizations now coordinate programs to keep students engaged, echoing the very initiatives Melissa had championed. Parents, students, and colleagues often speak of her as a guiding presence, as though her spirit lingers in hallways, classrooms, and playgrounds. The case also left its mark on the legal and investigative landscape of Ohio. In the wake of Melissa's arrest and the resolution of her 2012 cold case, lawmakers allocated additional funding for cold case DNA initiatives, expanding access to next-generation sequencing and forensic genealogy. The case demonstrated to prosecutors, detectives, and the public alike that time alone cannot erase the truth, and that scientific innovation can breathe life into investigations long considered hopeless. Cold case units now reference Melissa's file as an example of the potential of modern DNA analysis, emphasizing patience, persistence, and technological evolution. Melissa's parents remain tireless advocates, speaking at conferences and in media interviews about the combination of science, diligence, and community support that brought justice to their daughter. Her mother emphasizes that the breakthroughs were not just about catching a killer, but about proving that families should never stop believing in resolution. Her father often notes that while the arrest and conviction of David Larkin closed one chapter, the real victory is keeping Melissa's story alive, ensuring she is remembered not as a victim, but as a person whose life mattered deeply. Across Ohio, Melissa's story has become a beacon. It highlights the value of persistence in criminal investigations, the transformative power of forensic science, and the importance of community solidarity in the face of tragedy. For law enforcement professionals, educators, and everyday citizens, the case serves as both cautionary tale and inspiration. Even after years of silence and uncertainty, truth found its way to the surface, illustrating that cold cases can be solved and that victims' voices, however long muted, can finally be heard. Yet, amid memorials, scholarships, and legislative reform, a profound question remains for the community and for those who follow Melissa's story from the very beginning. What does true justice mean? Is it simply capturing a killer, or is it also about preserving the memory of a victim, honoring the life they lived, and ensuring their story continues to inspire? In Melissa Carter's case, perhaps justice is both a commitment to truth, a legacy of hope, and a reminder that even in darkness, the light of remembrance endures. In the end, what does true justice mean? Catching a killer or keeping a victim's memory alive forever?